Sarah Thompson nursed her coffee in the dim corner of the VFW hall, the kind of place where the air hung heavy with cigarette ghosts and half-forgotten laughs. At 68, she didn't come for the crowd anymore, just the quiet ritual of showing up, her fingers tracing the edges of the small enamel pin on her lapel, a faded eagle clutching a faded olive branch. It caught the eye of Tommy Reyes, the wiry kid behind the bar who just mustered out of his first tour, and he leaned over with that easy grin soldiers wear like armor. "Ma'am, that pin looks like one of those cheap souvenirs from the base shop. You buy it at the airport or something." Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes, but she let the question hang there, soft as the steam rising from her mug. That's when the door creaked open, and Colonel Harlan Graves stepped in from the rain-slicked parking lot. Graves was a relic himself, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, the sort of man who carried his rank in the set of his jaw even out of uniform. He spotted Sarah first, nodding like they shared some invisible thread, then slid onto the stool next to Tommy, who was still chuckling at his own joke. "Son," Graves said, his voice gravel over glass, "that pin you're eyeballing, it's not fake, not by a long shot." Tommy shrugged, wiping down the bar, but Sarah felt the room tilt just a fraction the way it does when the past knocks uninvited. Graves turned to her then, his eyes steady. "Sarah, it's been, 30 years? You still wear it every time." Little did Tommy know, the colonel wasn't done talking yet. Back in 68, Sarah had been Sergeant Elena Vasquez. No, that was her maiden name, the one she buried with her youth, 19 and green as the Mekong Delta Paddies. Shipped out with the 101st to a war that chewed up promises and spat out ghosts. She wasn't the hero type, not the one charging hills or scribbling letters home about glory. She was the fixer, the one who patched radios under fire and mapped supply runs that kept the platoons from starving in the monsoons. One night, though, during a resupply up gone sideways, ambush lightning, the kind that turns brothers to shadows, she dragged Lieutenant Harlan Graves from a burning Huey, her hands slick with his blood and her own, whispering prayers in Spanish her abuela taught her by the wood stove back in El Paso. They made it to the tree line, but the cost lingered in her shoulders, a knot that no chiropractor could touch, and that's when Graves, bandaged and half delirious, pressed something into her palm. A prototype pin, rough-edged and unmarked, one of 4 struck that week for the unsung who bent the rules of survival. The hall's fluorescent buzz pulled Sarah back, Tommy now hovering with fresh curiosity, pouring Graves a black coffee without asking. "4 of them?" The kid echoed, leaning in like it was bar gossip. Graves nodded slow, his fingers drumming the scarred formica. "Yeah. One for the medic who held a line with nothing but morphine and malice. One for the clerk who falsified manifests to get ammo to the grunts when Brass said no. One for the driver who turned a convoy around blind in the fog. And Sarah here." He trailed off, glancing at her with that old platoon look, the one that said more than words ever could. Sarah shifted in her seat, the pin suddenly heavy as a medal she never wanted. But Tommy's eyes lit up, hungry for the rest, and Graves wasn't one to leave a story half buried. She remembered the pin's weight that first night, tucked into her fatigues like a secret shame, because what she'd done wasn't protocol. It was desperation, pure and bone deep. Graves had been pinned under wreckage, radio crackling with orders to abandon ship. But Sarah couldn't leave him there. Not after he'd pulled her from her own wreck of a childhood, enlisting her when no one else would look twice at a girl from the barrios. She cut the fuel line herself, ignoring the sparks, hauled him foot by foot through mud that sucked like quicksand, her lungs burning with the screams of the others she couldn't reach. By dawn, command called it a miracle. She called it luck. The pin came later, in a quiet briefing tent, handed out by a general who muttered about discretion and the few who carry the weight for the many. Sarah pinned it on once, then hid it away for decades, pulling it out only on nights when the dreams got too loud. That's when the door swung open again, and in walked her nephew Javier, the one she'd raised after her sister's passing, carrying a shoebox under his arm like it held the family's silver. Javier was all city now, tattoos snaking up his arms from his mechanic days, but his face softened when he saw her, sliding into the booth with that awkward hug that said he was trying. "Tia, I found this in the attic. Your letters, the ones from Nam, thought you'd want 'em back." He didn't know about the pin, not really. She'd never burdened him with the full weight. Just the polished stories about camp coffee and card games to keep the dark at bay. Tommy and Graves watched quiet, the bar falling into that respectful hush that follows unfinished tales, and Javier's eyes snagged on the enamel glint. Wait, that's the one you never talk about. The special one. Sarah's throat tightened, the room blurring at the edges, but Graves cleared his throat, leaning forward like a father at a wedding. Little did Javier know, the colonel had a box of his own to open. Graves fished a worn leather wallet from his jacket, flipping it open to a faded photo. 4 soldiers, young and fierce, clustered around a makeshift fire, Sarah in the middle with mud-streaked cheeks and a grin that dared the world. "This was us," he said, voice low enough that it wrapped around the words like smoke. "The 4 who got the pins, not for medals or parades, for the choices that didn't make the history books. Sarah's was for that night. She didn't just save me. She saved the whole dam up, rerouting us through territory that should have been suicide. Brass buried it to keep the peace. But we knew." Tommy's jaw went slack. Javier's hand froze on the shoebox. Sarah felt the years peel back, exposing the raw ache she'd stitched over with silence and solitary toasts. The pin wasn't fake. It was the quiet thunder of what she'd given up, nights without nightmares, a life without the flinch at loud noises, the chance to tell her own son, lost too young to the bottle, why she came home hollow. The hall seemed to hold its breath then, the jukebox skipping on an old Hank Williams track, and Javier cracked open the shoebox, pulling out not just letters but a brittle commendation, yellowed and unsigned, dated the day after the ambush. "Tia, why'd you hide this?" His voice cracked, not with pity but with the sharp edge of realization, the kind that bridges generations in a single breath. Sarah reached for it, her fingers brushing the paper like it was skin. Then for the first time in 30 years, she let the words spill, not the edited version, but the truth of the rotor wash stinging her eyes, the weight of Graves' limp body threatening to drag them both under, the way she'd lied to the debrief officer about the route to protect the others who'd bent rules too. Graves nodded along, his own eyes glistening under the lights, and Tommy, the kid with the fresh ink and fresher doubts, slid a round of shots across the bar on the house. But as the glasses clinked, a shadow fell across the table, and in stepped Elena's daughter, Maria, the one who'd stopped calling after the last argument about living in the past. Maria hesitated in the doorway, rain dripping from her coat, her face a map of regrets etched deep from nursing shifts and solo parenting. She'd come because Javier texted something about the pin, the story, and now here she was, arms crossed like a shield, but her gaze locked on Sarah's lapel with a hunger that mirrored her own buried grief. She whispered, the word breaking the room's spell. I saw the post online. About the colonel. About you. Graves stood slow, offering his seat with a gentleman's nod, and Sarah felt the air thicken, charged with the unsaid accusations of years. Why the distance? Why the walls? Why the pin stayed a mystery when it could have been a bridge? Maria slid in beside her, close enough to smell the hospital soap on her skin, and that's when the first tear tracked down her cheek, silent as a confession. Little did anyone in that booth know, the real story was just beginning to unfold. Sarah took her daughter's hand, the calluses from years of wrenches and rifles meeting the soft pads of a healer's palms, and in that touch, the dam cracked, not with sobs or speeches, but with the steady recount of that Delta night. The way the pin's eagle seemed to watch over her like a guardian. She'd never asked for her. Maria listened, really listened, her breath sinking with the pauses in Sarah's voice, the subtle hitch when she spoke of the men left behind, the redemption in knowing her choice let Graves go home to his girls, let the platoon hold the hill. Tommy poured water now, refilling glasses with quiet reverence, and Javier squeezed Sarah's shoulder, his own eyes wet with the pride of carrying her name forward. Graves raised his shot, voice rough but warm, to the fore, and to the one who wears it proud. The burn of whiskey followed, sharp and cleansing, but as the group leaned in closer, Maria pulled something from her pocket, a duplicate pin, small and new, pressed into Sarah's free hand. "For me," she murmured, "so I can carry a piece too." The night stretched then, stories weaving like vines through the smoke. Tommy sharing his own fresh scars from the sand, Javier admitting he'd enlisted last month because of the attic letters, Maria confessing the hospital shifts were her way of honoring the fixer in her blood. Sarah sat at the center, the pin glinting under the low light, no longer a weight but a tether, pulling the fragments of her life into something whole. Graves lingered last, clapping her on the back as the others drifted out into the drizzle, his whisper carrying the weight of old debts. You saved more than me that night, Sarah. You saved us all from forgetting what dignity costs. She nodded, the hall emptying to echoes, and stepped into the rain alone, but not empty, the duplicate pin safe in her pocket like a promise kept. But as she turned the key in her old Ford, headlights cutting the dark, she glanced in the rearview and saw them, her family waiting under the awning, waving her back for one more round. And in that moment, the pin didn't look fake at all. It shone like the quiet honor she'd earned, one breath, one choice at a time.